Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a massive one, an event that truly defined a generation, 9/11. But we're going to look at it through a really different lens. Not the official report, but the persistent questions and anomalies that Andy Thomas lays out in his deep dive on the world's biggest conspiracy theories. The book frames 9/11 as the defining conspiracy theory of our time. It was a tragedy that didn't just change the world. It also created this powerful undercurrent of public doubt that is just as strong today as it was years ago. And look, this isn't some fringe idea we're talking about. The book points to polls from back in 2011 showing that nearly half the world's population had questions about the official story. So it's clear that a huge number of people feel like the story isn't over. All right, let's dive in. To really get a grip on this, we're going to treat it like an investigation. We'll break down the key arguments from the source, looking at the controversy, the mysteries of the three collapsed towers, the Pentagon crash, and this potential pattern of coincidences that might just tie it all together. So, what's the core claim here? The central accusation from what the book calls the 9/11 truth movement is that the attacks were a false flag event. The theory basically says that the tragedy was either engineered, manipulated, or just allowed to happen by covert forces to kickstart a whole new era of war and surveillance. Now, what's really interesting is where our first case file starts. It's not with the Twin Towers. Nope. It starts with a third skyscraper that collapsed that day, the very mysterious World Trade Center Building 7. And that's the question that kicks this whole thing off for a lot of people. Building 7 was a 47-story giant, with offices for the CIA and the Department of Defense. But at 5:20 p.m. on September 11th, it fell straight down, perfectly into its own footprint, and no plane ever touched it. So the official line is that fire damage from the collapsing North Tower caused it. But, and this is a huge but, the source points out that this explanation is completely unprecedented. No steel-framed high-rise had ever collapsed from fire alone before 9/11. And amazingly, not a single one has since. And then there's this comment, a comment that really threw gasoline on the fire. It's from the building's owner, Larry Silverstein. In a TV interview, he was talking about a conversation with the fire department, and he said that maybe the smartest thing to do was to pull it. Okay, so why is that phrase pull it such a big deal? Well, as the source points out, in the world of demolition, to pull a building is basically industry code for a controlled demolition. Now, Silverstein later said he meant pulling the firefighters out, but for theorists, this was a classic slip of the tongue that accidentally revealed the truth. And this same idea of controlled demolition, it gets applied even more directly to the main event, the Twin Towers themselves. I mean, the way those buildings fell has become maybe the most analyzed and debated piece of footage in modern history. So you've got these two totally different stories. The official story is that the jet fuel fires created this new phenomenon that made the buildings fail. The alternative theory, which is backed by a group of architects and engineers, argues that there's no way fire alone could do what we saw. For them, the only thing that makes sense is pre-planted explosives. And the folks who believe it was a demolition, they've got a whole list of physical evidence they point to. They highlight those little puffs of dust, or squibs, you can see shooting out from floors way below the collapse. They cite tons of reports of molten metal in the rubble, which would need temperatures way hotter than any office fire. And the big one, they argue the towers fell way too fast and way too neatly, collapsing through themselves at almost the speed of an object falling through thin air. All right, let's switch locations. Our investigation now takes us over to the Pentagon, where the questions aren't so much about how a building fell, but what actually hit it? This is where things get really strange, according to the source material. Flight 77 was a Boeing 757. I mean, this is a massive plane with a 125-foot wingspan. But when you look at the early photos of the impact site, you see a surprisingly small entry hole, and not much else. So you can see why this raises so many red flags. People ask, where are the marks from the wings and the giant tail? Why is the lawn so clean, with no huge debris field of seats and luggage? And how on earth did a pilot, who his own instructors said was basically incompetent, pull off a maneuver that professional pilots say was nearly impossible? These inconsistencies lead theorists to suggest that maybe it wasn't a 757 at all, but something else, like a missile. Okay, so the book then zooms out. It suggests that the weird anomalies of 9/11 weren't just a one-off thing. Instead, they might fit into a pretty disturbing pattern of coincidences that you can find in other major terror events. Get this. On the actual morning of September 11th, NORAD was actively running several air defense exercises. And in a mind-blowing coincidence, the drills were simulating the exact scenario of hijacked planes being used as weapons. You can even hear the confusion on the air traffic control tapes, with people asking, is this real world or exercise? For theorists, that's not a coincidence. It's the perfect cover. And if you think that's a wild coincidence, the source says, just wait. The exact same pattern apparently repeated itself 4 years later during the 7/7 terror attacks in London. That morning, a private company was running a drill, simulating bombs going off at the exact same subway stations where the real bombs actually detonated. The director of the company even went on the radio that day and talked about how uncanny it was. So you have the third tower, the questions about the Pentagon, these insane coincidences. It all funnels down to the biggest question of all: why? What could possibly be the motive for something so monstrous?
Well, for a possible motive, a lot of theorists point to this one document. It's often called the smoking gun. It was written a year before 9/11 by a group of powerful neoconservatives who would soon be in top jobs in the Bush administration. And in it, they openly said that their grand plans for American military dominance would be hard to achieve without a new Pearl Harbor to get the public on board. A year later, they got one.
And that's really the bottom line here, according to the book. These alternative theories exist, and they persist because for so many people, the official story just leaves too many critical questions on the table. For example, the 9/11 Commission report doesn't even mention the collapse of WTC-7. It's those gaps, those omissions, that have created the space for these other ideas to take root and grow for over 2 decades. So, we've dug into earthly politics and wars. But some theories suggest the real power players aren't from around here at all. Join us next time as we look to the skies to explore UFOs, Roswell, and yes, the reptilian agenda.